Evening. Ooh, loud. Good evening. I will now call the April 26, 2022 meeting of the Ben Lapine School Board of Directors to order. I'd like to introduce our participants this evening. To my right, I have Director Amy Tatum, Director Yanetsari Yorandi Gonzalez, Director Shamiko Montgomery, and Director Shirley Olson. Directors Carrie McPherson Douglas and Marcus LeGrand are unable to join us this evening. To my right, I have Superintendent Steve Cook, Deputy Superintendent Laura Nordquist, and Board Clerk Janet Bojanowski, and I am Melissa Barnes-Delakia, Chair of the Board. We are joined tonight by Aaron Trimble and Kayla Celadon for ASL interpretation, and our work session is also being translated into Spanish and posted to the BLS School Board YouTube page. At this point, we will move to item 2, the Pledge of Allegiance. Would you please stand, remove your hats, and join me? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll now move to item number 3, review of the agenda. Are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda. There are no changes to the agenda.
Fellow board members, are there any requested changes to the agenda? Seeing no changes, we will move forward. A note for our stakeholders, we do not take public comment during our work sessions. This is an opportunity for the board to engage in discussion on key board work and initiatives. We do take public comment, however, at each of our regular board meetings, and those are held the second Tuesday of each month. We'll now move into item number 4, our reports, and we will start with 4A, which is our Ela Adoption, which will be led by Julie Walker, Elementary Director of Curriculum, Instruction, and Systems.
Okay, I'm good. Oh, yes, I'm good. So I wanted to recap a little bit on where we're at or where we've been. So foundational skills is really phonics, phonemic awareness, fluency, and concepts of print. We decided to go ahead with a foundational skills adoption this year. And we decided to separate our 2 adoptions, to do foundational skills and then the language arts portion separately, just because we'd looked at some of the big box curriculums and found that we weren't really getting the quality of foundational skills materials that we really wanted. And we also wanted for our teachers to really have a skill block where they're working on foundational skills specifically every day. And so it made sense for us to think about a curriculum that was really focused in one area. So that was our why. And then, so I just want to update you on where we've been. So I'm going to just go straight to our timeline here. So we started way back in November where we selected 30 committee members. And then we conducted listening sessions with staff, families, community members. And we gathered all that feedback together, brought it to our team. That feedback led to the development of our core beliefs document. We then went back to the community and to our listening sessions and brought that information back to them for feedback. And then we came back and developed a rubric. And then we brought together 11 different programs that we began our process looking at over the last couple of months. and we are now down to 4 programs. So that's where we stand right now. And I just want to say before I go on, we have 30 teachers, reading specialists, language specialists, learning specialists, instructional tech specialists, instructional coaches, and admin representatives on this team. And I just want to thank them for all of their hard work. We have been moving quickly, and they have been doing a ton of work in this area. So I want to thank them. So we met on the 6th of April, and that was where we went from 11 programs to 4. Since then, let me just go forward. So since then, we're down to 4. The 4 programs are Wilson Foundations, Benchmark Phonics, Really Great Reading, and SIPS, which stands for Systematic Instruction in Phonological Phonics and Sight Words. So those are our 4 programs. So at the 4-6 meeting, we set all of our committee members up with lessons from every program to go out and field test and then provide feedback. So that's where we're at right now. From 4-6 to May 3rd, they are testing all of the materials and providing feedback. In between that, we also set up 5 school sites with materials. And so we set those up on the week of conferences, so we had the opportunity for families to come in and view all of the materials then. And we have digital materials as well. So we have a HyperDoc set up with links to videos where you can view all of the materials and then provide feedback right there. In addition to that, we have had 7 staff or community events, either here at the Ed Center, via WebEx, or at other sites. And those have also been digital as well. And so where we go next, so on the 4th of May, we will have a consensus meeting with the committee. And at that time, our goal is to make a decision on 1 program, come to consensus. And so then right after that, right after that, from the 5th of May till the 20th of May, we will have the materials out again for community members, for the school board, for staff members, to come and view the materials and provide additional feedback. And then we'll come back to you in between there on the 10th and bring a recommendation for that program. And then on the 24th of May, it's our hope to have a final recommendation and approval by the board at that time.
Julie, can I just step in just to clarify? So on the 10th, they will bring a single recommendation, and then on the 24th will be when the board will either accept or not accept that recommendation. Sorry.
All right, thank you for that. Oops, I didn't really want to go there. Okay, so that is a report on where we are at. Do you have any questions about the process or questions for me?
Just the timeline. So I see there's 5 days between the opportunity that the community gets to see it and the time that the recommendation gets brought. And then a big span of time between the recommendation and the final board discussion. What happens to all of the additional feedback that gets provided? I just want to make it look like the feedback is actually being taken, and this timeline, it makes it look like it's just sort of process and not actually.
Right, we'll bring it back to the team again and have them look at all of the feedback and then make sure that we're all in agreement on our consensus decision.
So that
And-
matches the recommendation?
Shamiko, can I just check? I'm just checking.
Yeah.
So for the 10th, the meeting the 10th, they're going from 4 to 1. So those 4 curricula have been available since mid-April. So we're just saying they're continuing with the 4 until after their meeting on the 4th. And then there will be the opportunity to look at the 1 between the 10th and the 24th. Julie, I think that's correct. Does that
That's
make
correct.
sense? So it's not like
That's right.
just from the 5th to the 10th is the only time they have to look at the 4 going to 1. Those have already been, in fact, they're down the hallway as we speak, but they've been out at schools and opportunities for electronic feedback for 2 or 3 weeks already.
Okay, yeah, I totally get where you're, I just wanted, it just looks a little. I think the slide. Okay. I trust you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Julie, I did have the opportunity to go online and look at all 4 of them. I know that we are interested in keeping one program across the district. I mean, I would guess that's why we're moving to one. There are some features that aren't in each of those 4. So it's very interesting to me how the committee is going to rank that. And you mentioned that you do have a rubric that you used from the 11 to 4. Will it be the same rubric to look at the 4, or are you diving a little deeper?
It will be the same rubric that we have used. Yeah. And there is, I mean, the committee has had some discussions on, depending on the curriculum that we go with, if we go K2 and 3-5 or across the board. So we have had some discussions around that.
Okay, so that might be a possibility?
Yeah, we feel like with the similarities in scope and sequence, it's more important for us to really focus on the instructional practices that we're trying to get in place into the classroom. And if we have a similar scope and sequence, we feel like we can still continue to work on those instructional practices that are really the most critical piece here.
Thank you.
Any additional questions? All right, thank you.
Great, thank you. And for our community, as Julie shared, these materials have been out for several weeks already for community review. They continue to be available, and I encourage people to go to the hot linked website. I definitely use that myself to look at the materials, and we look forward to hearing your feedback on that and having that for the committee. So lots of opportunities still for the 4, and then once they make the recommendation for the 1, continued opportunities for feedback on that 1 before we make a final vote. With that said, we will move on to 4B, item 4B, which is our executive limitation number 3, or EL3 report, and that will be Deputy Superintendent Nordquist.
The primary focus of EL3 tonight is Dave's work with your team, or the school board, around the Youth Truth results. But I did put the executive summary in, and I'm happy, before we turn it over to Dave, to answer any questions or provide clarification about anything in the EL3 report, or especially the executive summary that highlights kind of where we've been and where we're going.
Then we will move in to item 5, which is the meat of tonight, our work session, and that will be led by our Director of School Improvement, Dave Van Loo.
Testing. Pretty good. Okay. Thank you all for inviting me to be a part of this. Data is a big part of my job with the district, and it feels like over the last several years, our opportunities to really dig into important data, especially around student experience and learning and all that, has really been limited. So I'm excited by this opportunity. Really what we want to do tonight, some of our learning intentions. Ooh, I didn't even touch that and it moved. So I do want to talk a little bit about what is Youth Truth, the survey tool that we've now been using for 2 years. Talk a little bit about what the Youth Truth data say, and to really take an opportunity to analyze one very narrow, specific slice of our data. And I think a learning intention that's probably not up there is really you're going to have the opportunity to engage in a type of data analysis that we're actually asking all of our schools to do as well. So you're going to get a similar experience to what we have all of our schools doing with these data that we've gotten. But tonight our focus is going to be on high school student data, that piece of the survey. Youth Truth, actually, we survey parents and families, we survey staff, and we survey students. And the purpose of doing that is to really triangulate perspectives. I mean, they're all important stakeholders in our system, and so we want to make sure that we're getting a well-rounded picture of what's going on. I think a really helpful way to think about school improvement data is it really kind of falls into 4 domains. You've got data around student learning, which is pretty obvious. We've all seen a lot of that. You have data around demographics. Who are the different people in our system? You've got data around processes or systems. So how do we do the things that we do? And then finally, we have data around perceptions. How do people feel about what's happening? What do people think about what their experiences are? So I guess in thinking about those 4 things, Youth Truth is really a kind of at the point between demographics and perceptions, because the survey is all about perceptions, but it allows us to break out those perceptions among different, staff versus students, 6th graders versus 9th graders, ELL students versus non-ELL students. There's so many different demographic groups, so that really enables us to get a rich picture of what's happening in our district. So kind of the framework underlying Youth Truth is, it's really based on CASEL's SEL framework, their social emotional learning framework. If you're not familiar with CASEL, they are the collaborative for academic, social, and emotional learning. And this picture really is their model in a really concise little form. I think where we would start here is the bright colors in the center. Those orange and yellow and green at the center, those are the goals for individual students. For every student, we want them to become more self-aware. We want them to be responsible decision makers, have strong relationship skills, those type of things. Related to this, last fall, the Thomas Fordham Foundation released results of a poll of, I think, about 2,000, nationally representative sample of 2,000 different parents of K-12 students. And there were 2 really interesting findings from what they found. One was that there was really, really broad support for these principles of SEL across demographic groups. Whether it was a really diverse population. It was nationally representative, and all parents were really in support of these types of ideas. The other finding that they had, though, was that the term social emotional learning was really pretty unpopular with all parents. Nobody likes the term outside of schools. And parents' preferred term actually was life skills, which, you can imagine the chaos that causes trying to overlay that into schools, with life skills already having significant meaning to what it is in the special ed world. So, but I think that's important, because this is one of those issues where, this 3-letter acronym, we can end up talking past each other a lot when we really are talking about the same things. It's just people have different perceptions of what SEL is. So if we can ground our conversations in social awareness and strong relationship skills and these ideas, then I think we'll get a lot more support from parents and teachers and everyone involved in the system. So the bright colors are the goals for students. The blue rings are the environments that really support developing those 5 skills. And Youth Truth is focused on those 2 darkest innermost rings. It's classrooms and it's focused on schools. Really, Youth Truth, it's focused on helping schools identify what are the cultures, what's the climate, the practices, the policies in our classrooms and schools that are going to have the biggest impact on helping students develop these types of life skills. And I think a key point to make here is, especially because we're talking about student data tonight, this is not an assessment of our students. This is assessment by our students of our system. A lot of the times when we're talking about student data, it's about, well, what are you learning? This is about how our system is supporting those students. So it's a really powerful voice to have in our conversation. So some of the relevant background data to give some context to this. Youth Truth, I would say, is a small but mighty organization. It's a nonprofit, but it's international. It's in 39 states. There's over 2 million students that have been surveyed. And yeah, they're doing really powerful work in a lot of places. I think, I've got notes somewhere. I think there are about 30 Oregon districts or so that are using Youth Truth right now. Some of the larger districts are us, I think, and North Clackamas and Medford are probably about the largest. As a district, we had about 3,800 high school students take aspects of this, which comes out to about a 71% response rate. Nationally, if you look at Youth Truth's high school student response rate, it's around 73%. So we're right kind of on track with what we tend to find there. And even though we're not talking as much about it tonight, staff, I think we were somewhere above the 90% participation rate, and students, we were, students across the district, it really varies by level. High school was our lowest. Elementary we didn't do it. Middle school, it was probably more like 90, 95%. And then for families, participation is in the low to mid 30%, which in the context of all of those others sounds really low, but what Youth Truth has set, I forget the exact number, but I think it's right around, it's in that, is it 30? Right around the 30 range is the benchmark that they're looking for to get good data from families. So yeah, we were able to hit all of those targets. In terms of student representation, we're going to be looking at 8 different demographic subgroups tonight. So you see 4 of those subgroups up there: ELL, LGBTQ+, persons of color, and special education. One thing to note about all of these, they're all self-identified. So there's no external data coming into this. It's like if a person says they're a person of color, they self-identified as that. It's not coming from anywhere else. The other 4 subgroups are kind of the inverse of these. It's non-ELL, it's non-LGBTQ, it's non-person of color, and it's general ed, not special ed. So that when we're able to do that, that gives us a really true sense of gaps. A lot of the times in education, we'll take a group of students and compare them to the overall, which happens to include that group of students we're comparing it to. But when we're able to do this and break it out, the yes, completely yes versus the completely no, we get a little bit more, I guess, realism in some of the data. Overall, these numbers look really in line, as percentages, they look really in line with what our district numbers look like overall. And so if you combine that with the fact that we had over 70% participation, we're able to be reasonably confident that these data are representative of these populations in our schools. Can't ever guarantee it. I mean, it could be that even though if we had 12% of our respondents identified as special ed, I mean, it's theoretically possible that a disproportionate number of those respondents are from like the LD and communication groups, and there could be other groups that are not adequately represented. So there's little nuances like that. It's never going to be perfect. If we want guarantees, we shouldn't be working with people, because it's just, you're never going to get it. But overall, so the data look really promising, and I think we can have confidence in it. So the process that we're going to engage in tonight, Youth Truth is organized by themes. So there's a bunch of individual questions, but those questions roll up into themes. There are, I think, 6 different themes that we're going to look at tonight. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the theme, and we're going to give everyone time to dig into the data individually. So not a discussion, not talking with other people. It's just, so you're going to have a protocol, you're going to have access to the data, and you're going to have time to actually just dig into this on your own. I think we're probably targeting around 15 or 20 minutes for that. So it might be awfully quiet in here for a board meeting for a while, but we'll see how that goes. And these questions, there's a protocol. The questions are really focused on getting at what the students are telling us in their data. We're going to work really hard tonight to avoid adding our own interpretations, our own conclusions, our own assumptions, like what we think the data means. We want to really stay focused on that level of what are the data telling us. Hopefully you all had a chance to check out that little TED Talk on the ladder of inference. The big idea in that is, I mean, it's a ladder, but it's also a cycle. And the big idea there is our beliefs impact the data we choose to pay attention to, and the data we choose to pay attention to ends up impacting our beliefs. So, I mean, for thousands of years, people do this kind of decision-making thousands of times a day. It's instantaneous. People have been doing this for thousands of years because it's been really fruitful for the most part. But there are times when it isn't advantageous. Probably the most salient example these days is social media. I mean, you see people getting fed the same information, which enhances their beliefs in that, and it becomes a vicious rather than a virtuous cycle. So what we're gonna really try to spend our time focusing on this first rung of the ladder. What are the students trying to tell us? There's a just absolutely brilliant definition someone gave of formative assessment, and it's that the purpose of formative assessment is to make students' voices louder and adults' hearing better. That's really what we're trying to do tonight. So elevate student voices, make sure we have a deep understanding of what they're trying to communicate to us. Once we have that shared understanding, then eventually we would dig into what we're going to do about the data. I guess one other thing I would say about all this is we're looking at a small slice of high school student data tonight. I mean, with ELL and LGBTQ and persons who identify as persons of color and special ed. That's going to give us one perspective. We could have chosen grade level, gender, and student GPA, and I promise you the conversation we would have in the data would look nothing like the conversation that we're going to have in these. So just like, keep in mind, this is one small piece of the data of a larger important picture. So the protocol for each theme, you have a handout that looks like this. So there's just 3 pretty straightforward questions. Compared with with schools nationally, how do students rate our school? Compared with other Oregon schools, how do students rate our school? And for those, I would recommend you just think in terms of 3 groups: average, below average, or above average. So if students rate us between about the 25th and the 75th percentile, the middle 50%, that's a good measure of average performance. If you're outside of that average range in the middle, if you're below the 25th, we could pretty safely say that's below average. And if you're above the 75th percentile, that's a reasonable indicator of above average. But I mean, we kind of want to not get stuck in this mindset that average is the kiddo at the 50th percentile and everything else is wildly different from that. So those questions are going to apply to the district as a whole, and then for each of these themes, we're going to dig into our student groups of interest. And the question there is, what potentially important differences do you see among the subgroups data that we're looking at? So this is what you will be looking at. All the charts are going to look an awful lot like this. Again, the orange are district level and national and Oregon level data. The blue are subgroup data. So is that a laser? No. I've got one here then. Never leave home without it. It's really fun with cats too. So just show this right here. So this rectangle that is the entire national data set. So this is the lowest school rated nationally. This is the highest school rated nationally. This is the 50th percentile nationally. This is where our district is on this, or this district is. So they're at the 73rd percentile compared to all other schools in the nation. We also get to see, for our purposes, it's going to be, our cohort is going to be other Oregon high schools. So this mark right here is the 50th percentile of Oregon high schools. This is going to be the lowest performing Oregon high school on this measure. This is going to be the highest school in the cohort on that measure. Sometimes we're going to see this lower orange line. That's comparing to last year's data. Sometimes we don't. It's a new question. We didn't have access to those data. But so another comparison we're always going to get to see is, well, did we go up? Are we flat? Or did we go down relative to what we were seeing back in January of 2021? And then finally, the blue are going to be all the different student groups of interest, and they're going to be on a similar scale. So you will see what percentile rank they are at compared to the rest of the groups. A little bit more context here. It's really important to keep in mind that in January 2021, we were in full remote learning. No high school students were really setting foot into our schools. In January 2022, we were fully in person. So generally, when we're trying to speak towards trends, we don't want to change things that massive because it adds a lot of error to it, but it is what it is. So just as you're looking at these data and thinking about differences across years, keep that in mind. It's like kids are in pretty different places. Again, just to summarize the rest of the activity, 7 data slides, 6 of them are going to be overall themes. The last one is actually not going to be a theme. It's a specific question from the domain of emotional and mental health. The reason for that is there actually isn't an overall theme score that rolls up to that measure, but I thought it was important to at least have one measure of that, so I chose one of the more global looking types of questions related to student emotional and mental health. Also included is this, I think, a handy little T-chart. And what's on here is the idea of, are we, as we're making statements about the data, are they factual observations actually based on what the students are telling us, or is this statement an inference, an assumption, a belief, something else? I would just envision this as a type of scaffold, because it's really hard to look at data and not start to get sucked up the ladder and start to think about what's causing this, what are we going to do about this, all that. So like, again, so to keep us down at that level of what are students trying to tell us, how do we interrupt this cycle of just shooting up the ladder repeatedly, this is a tool that might be helpful. And then the last thing I think I could point out is the last slide in your packet are these closing reflection questions. So that's what we'll do as a group. Once you've had time to process these data on your own, then that's going to be our chance to have a broader discussion. What are the themes you see in the data? What are some of the big ideas or trends in student perception? So, and there's some question or prompts in here, like, I was surprised by, I learned that, I wonder about, I'd like to see more data about, so those types of questions. Again, the goal, I've said this a bunch of times, but I don't think I can say it too many times. Really, our goal is to stay grounded in kind of a sense of inquiry tonight. We wanted to hear what students are telling us and spend a lot of time there. So this is the first slide, and what we've done is at the bottom of the page, there's a description of what the theme is. So for engagement, Youth Truth defines it as the degree to which students perceive themselves as engaged with their school and their education. So why don't we, I don't know, do we want to start with like 15 minutes and then just check in and see if we need another 5 minutes after that?
Clarification, Dave? You want us to go through all of the slides?
Yep.
I mean,
So-
all of the data pieces?
Yep. And
Okay.
for each of the slides, there's the same set of questions.
Yes.
Tie back to it. So, yep, it works out to about 2 or 3 minutes per slide to start to dig into this.
Thanks for printing them for us. I was going to do that.
You are welcome. All right, I'll get a timer set and we can go.
And a quick note for our public that is watching, if you go on to our website, this presentation is in our board book, so you actually will be able to see each of these graphs as well if you want to look at them, as well as the questions, yes. Dave, can I ask a clarifying question real quick? I'm noticing that the key varies on the graphs for English language learners, where sometimes non-English language learners are on top and English language learners are on bottom, and sometimes it is the inverse, and I just want to make sure that what is listed is what that percentage, that
Yeah.
number goes with.
So what that's telling you is, because I believe what they do is they always put the group with the higher rating on top.
Okay,
So that means the group
got it.
flipped.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, all of these these are actually just screenshots directly out of Youth Truth's data. There was no changing.
Great, thank you.
put your pencils down. That was 15 minutes. Do we want another 5, or are we feeling wrapped up? Okay. So, yeah, I think let's open it up. This is your, I'd say your turn to discuss things. I will I'll drive, I guess. If you want me to jump around to different slides and there's things you want to call out, I'll try to make that accessible to people. So who wants to kick us off?
I can start with some general observations. I think that when we're looking at what our students are telling us overall about our school systems, our belonging and peer collaboration and our emotional and mental health are strengths overall, so our average across groups. And so both of those ranked high across the nation, though the belonging and peer collaboration was not as high when ranked against Oregon schools. Conversely, they're telling us that they don't feel ready for college and career, and that they don't feel challenged. Both of those were below the 25th percentile overall. So those would be a couple of the big picture pieces. And I could say a lot more, but I think looking at those subgroups, it's pretty consistent with our subgroups, and there's a lot of correlation. So by far, the subgroup that is telling us that our system is not working for them is the 19% of students who identify as LGBTQ+. And that is, it's pretty drastic in the data. I'm going to stop there because there's a lot of observations and I want other people to be able to speak.
Yeah, I had many of the same observations. I also thought it was interesting that with some things it seemed like, we did better when we were in distance learning. We were ranked higher. And I'm curious what the data showed last year among LGBTQ, really stands out as feeling like we are not serving them well across domains. What were their numbers like? And you don't have to answer this now if this is not the right time, but what were their numbers like when we were in distance learning? And I asked that question because my experience in primary care was a lot of my patients who identified as LGBTQ adolescents did better when they were online because they were not dealing with bullying. So I would be really curious what that data showed, how their experience was during January of 2021 compared to January of 2022.
So I'm finding it a little challenging to speak about the interest groups when I myself belong to those interest groups. Being a person who identifies openly as a queer person, being a person of color, and also having children that identify within some of those subgroups. And so looking at some of the data, I look at the closing reflection statement and I think I would word it more as I was not surprised to see. And I knew that we were failing some of these students. And so it does leave a lot of room for wondering more in depth of the questions that were asked, what mark it hit, what resonated with those students that do identify within the 2S LGBTQ community, or for the students of color and for our special ed students. One of the questions that I did wonder is if we do have more specific data on what specifically was the academic challenges that students didn't feel were hitting that mark for them. And so I wonder if there is a way to sort of disaggregate a little bit of that and finding out I guess that goes further than just a survey, but where exactly that mark isn't hitting for them as far as being challenged academically.
So that's something I'll actually jump in and talk about. So we saw that was a big theme last year as well. And one of the things I remember at the meeting that I referenced when we talked about this is the group, the New Teacher Project, TNTP, I think is the acronym. So they did a big study where they looked at basically the work that students were being assigned, and what they found was that students were successfully completing that work over 70% of the time, but only 17% of the time was that work on grade level standards. So there's an epidemic out there of under-challenging students. That's not a Ben Lapine issue. It is a Ben Lapine issue, but it's not specific to us. And about a month ago, I was actually in a session with John Hattie talking about, they just did this huge international survey, and they're finding the same theme across the world. There's a lot of students all over the place who are reporting that academic challenge is something that's lacking in their schools. So it's an area for improvement for a lot of us. Thanks for
And
calling
Dave,
that out.
am I correct in stating that in addition to work not being at grade level, they also have found that teachers are over scaffolding work and not releasing. So it's also the instructional practices, not just the curriculum, and that they're over scaffolding and not putting the learning on the students.
Yep.
Yeah.
One piece that I really wanted to know was how this broke down school by school. Just to know, like, if there were great differences in certain areas between subpopulations from one school to another, to kind of understand what is that school doing, and to learn from just the various things that could be different between schools. So that would be something that I'd be really interested to see.
Is that possible?
Oh,
Excuse me, Dave, is that possible?
yeah,
To disaggregate that at that level?
Yeah, we have school level data, yes, and we actually are explicit about making that available to all of our schools, so they can pick up the phone and call, say, if a school was really strong in one area, they can, have some communication and figure out, so what are you doing here that's working so well? Is that something that we can try? So, yeah, we try to be very open about sharing data within our system, as long as we're not talking about individual kids. When we're talking about bigger systems, we want to be pretty transparent.
And Dave, when you looked at it broken down by school, did you see big differences by school, or was the data fairly consistent across the board?
Yes. Yes, we see big differences, and we see a lot of similarities in a lot of places too. And I think that identifies a system challenge. Like, anytime you see a lot of spread, that means there's inconsistency in what we're doing. So if we can, if you look at let's see, what was it, the last one, I mean, that is what we want to see for all of our groups. You see above average and tight. And we want, obviously, there's two groups on there we really need to move up, but that's really what we're looking for. The tighter we get our data on a measure like this, the better our systems, and the less, the less inconsistent we are across our sites.
Yeah, I think another noticing that I just really had, and I probably, unless you've already done this, and I'm probably going to make a spreadsheet later that just has these all side by side for each group, because I started writing it down. But the numbers are shockingly similar when you look at those subgroups. Not shockingly, I guess, to Yanette's point. I mean, but they're very similar when you look at engagement, when you look at culture, when you look at belonging, and you look at relationships. Some of these subgroups, it's a difference of 0.05 across each of their ratings. And so really seeing consistency across those in terms of how the school is developing the culture, how they feel about the culture of the school, how they feel about the relationships with their peers, how they feel about their own social emotional wellness, et cetera. And so there's a lot of similarities in that data for those subgroups.
I also thought it was very interesting that the differences between the 2 years for our district. Only in 2 places were the percentiles, the average percentiles higher, only in 2 themes were the percentages higher as kids came back to school. I would have expected it to be the other way. So only in the area of belonging and career ready it was better now than it was last year. And everything else, there is not a huge differential, but at least notable. And the same thing with, compared to other Oregon districts, we know we talk and I think I'm on the right side of the T-chart. But we talk about making our kids feel very comfortable at school and feel like they belong. And we're way ahead of most Oregon schools on that one, way ahead. And I mean, that's a good thing in my estimation. But then when you dig into that data and you look at the subgroups, then you see the differences. And again, I don't think we're surprised at the data.
Yeah, and I'd point out I am excited to see how far ahead we are compared to Oregon on that data point, but we are below Oregon on every other one of these categories. And it does make me think, because we are in the process of really taking our board goals. The cabinet has done a revision of that. They've suggested some new measures. And, I think data like this will really help us start putting some targets in place collaboratively of, where do we see this and where do we want this to go? And how do we want to measure progress as a board? Do we want to measure it as, things all moving up? Do we want to measure it as closing the gap? Do we want to measure it compared to the Oregon average or the national average, or just a specific number that we're shooting for? There's a lot of different ways we can work with this data, but I think having this really helps us move that conversation forward in terms of our goal around every student experiencing a welcoming school environment with equity and belonging.
Dave, have the high schools requested the school-by-school information, or have they just been advised that it is available?
So we share it with them, but within the security within the system, what they do is actually the way they display it is as a cohort. So just like we're looking at our district versus Oregon schools, what the schools see by default is our school versus all of Ben Lapine aggregated together.
And what about teacher leadership? Have they had access to this data, or will they have an opportunity to sit and look at it? I think there's a couple surprises from a teacher's perspective, particularly whether or not they're comfortable with or think their teachers are involved with them, and the academic challenge piece. I mean, I think that would come as a surprise to a lot of our staff. We have highly educated staff. We have students that excel in every area, and I think that would cause some disagreement with the data if you focused on that group reviewing it. Maybe I'm wrong, and I hope I am, but I think it would come as a surprise to them.
Yeah, so we do have, I guess I'll call it the expectation that we want every school to dig into some aspect of these youth truth data by the end of the year. And we've actually created materials similar to these that we've sent out to every school. So it's basically a plug and play module that they can use if they want to use ours. If they want to go out and do something else, they have the opportunity to do that as well. So yeah, that's something that we're building in.
I'd add that one of the things that's interesting when you look at the themes, you can also, it's pretty easy to get the actual individual questions. So for example, Shirley, you're expressing that surprise of how low our students rated us on the challenge of their classes. And again, going up the ladder of inference, I've heard some administrators say, well, this could be because of blah or because of blah. But when you read the questions themselves, that takes away, oh, this is how they answered this question. I mean, my teacher knows how to explain things in a way that I can understand. You know, my work, you know, I forget exactly the questions, but you can actually dig into the actual questions. And I think that's really valuable to the teachers because that helps clarify what kids were answering under the actual questions they were responding to in each of these themes. And they're really interesting.
And you know, Laura, I always ask this question. The annual school plans, are we expecting to see some of those goals come right out of this data?
Yes, the school design plans, and also used as, this is the second year we've done it, so now we're starting to get, you start to begin a trend line, and so it can also be a measure of implementation, you know, that not just on setting the goals, but you know, would we want to see, what areas are we really focusing on where we would want to see a movement in our students' perception or our families' perception on certain aspects of our design plan?
And I would just like to add a couple of things. The first one is, I think we want to stay grounded in that this is system feedback for the system. And I think that it's important for us to think about then what do we do as we reflect on what the system, what the students are telling us collectively in the aggregate about how they see the system. And that's the first thing. And so we can pull back from that and get very specific consistencies of expectations that I think are some of those points that we want to move forward and focus on. Secondly, I would remind us, we had a little bit of this conversation, that's when I was going to ask Dave. Some portion of the student population is new this year, right? You've got seniors that have moved on. You now have freshmen in this group, and you would have some component of 10, 11, 12 that were there as 9, 10, 11 last year. And so there is going to be some variance just in that population. And I think before we ascribe decisions at the teacher level, we need to be cautious about what those things are. I think this is fantastic data for us to talk about what would we as a system want to focus on. And there are some very clear indicators here that are telling us very clear actions that we want to be responding to and creating systems around. But at the same time, if we were to bring this in as one of our high schools data set, and they are actually doing much better in an area that we're interested in now as the overall system, then we might be seeing evidences of best practice going on in that school and what is working, and then how do we share that with our other schools so that we are talking about the system and the system's expectations. That's my first point. My second point is I think there's a significant interest in moving beyond the analysis of the data and actually starting to diagnose what we might be actually seeing. And I think that's part of what I want us to consider as a next step. Some of this can't be done by looking at perception data. It's going to have to take a much deeper dive. And when we talk about why, for example, it's anecdotal, it might not be in our case, but Dave's example about students doing what they were asked to do, and in that particular case, it wasn't enough academically so that the rigor and challenge of those particular assignments didn't match a grade level standard expectation. If those are things that we want to dive into more, there's explicit ways in which you can do that across the system in which we can get those questions truly diagnosed and answered for our purposing, and then we build the structures and systems that we would train teachers and staff with to help recognize that when it might be happening, if that were so the case.
Do we have a commitment to continue using this instrument? I think the third year data would definitely be interesting. I think it would be, in fact, crucial to help understand the first 2 years, particularly with the difference of in-person and online instruction.
Yeah. If I get a vote, yes, we'll continue to collect the data. But
And we have a 3-year contract right now.
it was a
Is that right?
I don't remember if it was 2 or 3.
And the board fully may say this could be a measure that they wish to continue to be used as points of evidence for the board goals. Absolutely.
Yeah, and just historically, this was something that the board asked for, was we asked for a measure to be used with students, families, and staff, and that could be disaggregated by subgroups. Our previous ones, we didn't have that ability, and so this was a direct ask, and this was the one that was selected out of a couple of different options.
Melissa, you mentioned where we can find the information online and where the general public can go. Is it in the same format as the handouts? What's available online, the graphs and data?
So just, these are not just available to the general public. Like, the general public couldn't go in and look up any data at any school for that, but we've posted this slideshow for the public. That's all that's
Gotcha,
currently
okay.
available.
Are we working to have this material translated into Spanish at any point?
I believe it already is.
It is, and it's
Yes.
posted? Okay,
Yes.
thank you.
Yep. Yeah, so everything that we got, this is literally a printout from the packet.
So Dave, because, we're being presented with the student data, but also collected it for staff and families. Were there huge differences among staff perception, family perception versus student perception?
I would say generally no, and I would say generally what we heard back from stakeholders was pretty much identical to what we heard last year. From families, actually, I printed off, made a little summary here. From families, they see our strengths generally around relationships and cultures, the culture of our buildings, and the lowest rated areas tend to be around engagement and communication and feedback. Now, engagement is one area where my opinion is I'm probably not that worried about that right now because we've spent the better part of 2 years actively keeping people away from our schools, so it wouldn't surprise me that they feel a little bit disengaged. To the extent that we can open our doors and ask people in, then if we see issues with people reporting a lack of engagement, then I'd be more concerned with it for sure. Students also, belonging, culture, relationships tend to be the highest points, and it's the academic challenge is pretty much the number one for areas for improvement for students. From staff, again, the highest rated, just like last year, it has to do with relationships and culture. So, that was really clear last year. It's really clear this year. That is something that Ben Lapine District does really well, is establish strong relationships and culture. The lowest rated area, professional development, professional learning for staff. And the other one that I don't remember it being a huge issue last year, but it was school safety. But that bubbled up this year, which again, given the context, I'm not all that surprised that would rise up. So, but the professional learning is really the one that is stuck out, and that's elementary, that's middle, that's high school, that's across the board.
Dave, will you be providing the family survey results to families and same with the students?
So what we're actually asking schools to do is to touch base with all of the stakeholders. So anyone that we've collected information from, that we've asked to help us, we want to make sure to report it back. So we've given schools resources. Actually, Youth Truth provides a lot of resources. In their website, there's a backpack that has all sorts of great ideas for things that principals can do to just reach out to families. Hey, this is what you told us in the survey. Hey, this is something that you told us in the survey. So yeah, we definitely want schools to be doing that. We've provided them resources to be able to circle back with the stakeholders. The last thing that we want to do is ask people to provide us a bunch of information and then hoard it and not acknowledge what they told us. It's
Yeah.
really important that it's a two-way street of communication.
Absolutely, and I do think the families would love to see what, as a whole, they were saying, and especially like utilizing PTOs and family groups, and to take a hold of that information and really partner with the schools to find solutions. I think it would be phenomenal
Yeah.
to push that out and ensure
And
that they're getting
they've
that
really
data.
made it like simple. Like one of the things that anyone in the schools can do is for any one of these graphs, they can basically click a button that'll export it into a really nice little icon that they can drop in their family newsletter and share with families that way. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities for simple ways to share. I don't know that we want to send reports, like here's a 98-page report on everything that families told us about our schools. I don't see a lot of benefit for that, but yeah, a lot of short, sweet, direct communication of the biggest ideas, I think, is crucial.
Dave, is there the ability in Youth Truth to be able to disaggregate by socioeconomic status?
Yes, but so again, one of the strengths of a survey like this is it's completely anonymous. So, and when a survey is anonymous, we can have greater faith that people are willing to answer honestly. An issue that I've seen in this year compared to last year is our free and reduced, which is the measure for economic hardship, has absolutely blown up because we were giving every student free lunch last year. So if a student or family says, do you get free lunch at school? The answer is yes. Yeah, we saw, I'm just making a number up here, a 40% increase in that. So that happening makes it really hard to use that piece of Youth Truth. If that were not an issue, then yeah, it's there. But
So then in future years, we would be able to disaggregate it, and then, for example, our school site councils could look at that when they're doing their work around Title I funds. Yeah.
Yep.
Great. One wondering I have that I would be really interested in is I wonder about a correlation between the gaps that we see in outcomes between our subgroups and the general population, and whether they correlate or not to the academic outcomes for the gap in the academic outcomes for those subgroups, as well as the gap in other engagement indicators such as attendance and chronic absence. And I would be interested in looking at that because I think that those two pieces together help inform any type of action planning for how to continue to increase outcomes for kids.
that's something I think we could talk about in finer grain details at a later time.
Are there any other questions or comments, wonderings, or asks for data?
No, but I think you hit the nail on the head when you talked about, as we are pursuing the work that we have identified in the next at least 18 months, probably, that the metrics will be very important. How are we going to know that we're better? If a different group of kids answer the same question, is that, at what validity level is that? But again, the issue is what is it that we want to know, how we ask the questions, and then what do we do with the information? And how do we ideally have a metric that says we are getting better? So that discussion I'm hoping will come up soon.
And one of the things I'd just like to add, because, Ned, I think about earlier you talked about how surveys are just the surface. We had a former director of school improvement who said that just tells you the next question to ask. So when we think about our next excellence and equity review and our systems performance review, really digging in, like with student groups, with family groups, about what does this statement mean to you? Why? And where you can have those conversations and really dig into, so that you can intervene and change in a more effective way.
Great. So first, thank you, Dave, for bringing this data to us. Thank you also for researching and selecting and then adopting the Youth Truth Survey. I think that this is really strong work. I, again, want to say how excited I am about the work that Superintendent Cook and the Cabinet have done this year in terms of really taking what the board put forth as board goals, really digging in and reworking those a bit. And coming up with measures. I look forward to that continued work as a board and really collaborating together to articulate our goals, which of the measures we're going to use, and then setting those metrics. And then I think that we've heard Superintendent Cook also speak to in some previous board meetings, really looking at this. This is what our kids have said, but really taking some time next year to do a full systems review of what, what's working, what can we improve on, so that we can come with really concrete actions. And then at every board meeting, what we're really talking about is what's the goal that we had? We said we want to know about how our kids are experiencing, students, our students, our families, and our staff are experiencing our schools, and we want to see it disaggregated. So throughout our board meeting cycle, being able to come, look at a goal, look at data, and then hear about actions. And so at our next board meeting that we'll hear about some of the actions from Kenzie Martin and her team. Is that correct? I think it's in May. It's either the board.
It's May, for sure. It's either I think it's the May 25th.
I'm looking at Kenzie, May 24th workshop,
May 24th
right?
workshop.
The lead team.
That's right.
Yeah.
I remember now. It's
And
May
the
24th.
equitable grading
Great.
team. Or the
Yeah.
yeah.
And so that'll give us an opportunity to see some of the actions, and then we also had some actions and some priorities set forth in our EL3 report that we didn't talk about here, but it is in the board packet of steps that the district has taken and what they're prioritizing. So I think this cycle that we're getting into, that's really rooted in a strategic plan with a lot of data, is the right direction for us. And I'm really excited and very thankful for this presentation and for this data, Dave. Okay. All right. With that said, we will go to item number 6, which is board comments.
Just briefly, really excited to meet with some students tomorrow to hear more from their perspective, which is what we're after. So I'll be visiting Ben High with the Design Justice Club tomorrow and getting even more feedback to fuel our intentions.
I will say that in the last couple of weeks, a couple of things. One of them was really digging that I've done. One was really starting to dig in and really hear from families regarding racial bias incidents that are happening in our district, and really hearing from the families together as we work to address that and keep that from happening in our district. And then another piece was being able to celebrate the work of FAN and our FAN advocates in our school. It is an amazing program. We're very lucky that there are 29 FAN advocates that are working with 100 community organizations across Central Oregon and are connecting our students with what they need in terms of their basic needs and their families as well, to make sure that our kids can come and learn. So that was very exciting, and we got to hear from our superintendent at that celebration as well. So with that said, our next regular school board business meeting is scheduled for, oh shoot, I forgot one other thing. We held a listening a public forum. Gosh, that was a huge thing. We had our public forum last Thursday. We had about 25 to 30 people in attendance. We got through, I think, about 20 questions. We ran out of time and didn't get to a few, and then there were a couple people who felt like, I'm not sure that the consolidated question quite answered my question, so I was able to circle back with all of those individuals and individually through email to make sure that they had their questions answered. It was a really nice evening. I want to really give a huge appreciation to all of our level leaders, heads of nutrition, et cetera, who came because they are the people with boots on the ground that are doing this work and provided excellent answers on everything from transportation to meal services to volunteering in our schools to diversity, equity, inclusion to curriculum adoptions, et cetera. So thank you to all of our cabinet that showed up, and thank you to all of our public who came or submitted questions. So then, with that said, our next regular school board meeting is scheduled for May 10th, 2022, and this meeting is adjourned.